Good evening, everyone. And thank you all for coming. Tonight, we celebrate the 30th Hayalullah, the passing of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. The Zohar tells us that Tzaddik dispater ishtakich b'chula almin yatim b'chayohi, a tzaddik that passes away is found in this world more than ever before. Today, we feel the Rebbe's presence, the Rebbe's influence, and the Rebbe's inspiration more than ever before. The purpose of celebrating a day of passing is to learn and to be inspired from the life and legacy of that individual. Therefore, a Yahrtzeit is celebrated not only by Jews and for Jews, but should be, in the words of the Rebbe, honored and hallowed by non-Jews and Noachites as well. The purpose, as aforementioned, to be inspired and to resolve to live a better and more productive life. And so tonight, we have a beautiful program in honor of Gimel Tammuz. To begin with the first speaker, his name is Mark Asnin, a documentary photographer whose work has appeared in the New Yorker, New York Times Magazine, Time, Reader's Digest, and Newsweek. Photographs he took 3 decades of his maternal uncle, Charlie Henschke, were published in his award-winning book called Uncle Charlie. He has taught photography at the School of Visual Arts, and his images are in the permanent collection of the Museum of Modern Art and the Museum of the City of New York. Without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you this evening, Mark. Come on up.
Good? Okay. Thank you, Rabbi Rebbetzin, for inviting me tonight to be part of this celebration in memory of the Rebbe and to celebrate, all our either direct or indirect experiences and how the Rebbe changed our lives. Special thanks to David, who, we collaborated, we love each other, and Diane and his children here who have given me unconditional love, and we produced the book. To the Attorney General, thank you. And we share past history, knowing many people in the journalism world, so that's a special connection we have. Okay. Our lives are made up of moments. These moments can metamorphose into a movement, and that's why we are here tonight. We are gathered here tonight sharing this moment as Jews to honor a man that arrived on the shores of America in 1941. He, like countless number of Jews during those dark times, were fleeing religious persecution and for their lives. He would embark on a new life in a new foreign land. He had a vision, and this was not an orthodox one. It would be revolutionary in its approach that would change the lives of Jews that lost their connection to their Jewishness across America and the world. I believe and know that it was the Rebbe's unconditional love for every Jew that was at the core of the movement that is now known all over the world as Chabad. Some places are life-defining. The streets of Brooklyn in the 60s and 70s define me. The odds were you either became a gangster or a cop, and what they both had in common was being great storytellers. I chose the middle ground and became a different kind of storyteller. Those South Brooklyn streets created proud and very tough Jews. And let me be clear, in the strongest terms, I never, and my brethren, never felt any love from the Orthodox Jewish community that ran the synagogues and the after-school Hebrew schools. When I walked through the door of my Hebrew school, there was a stench in the air of anger and hatred towards me and the rest of the young men. Like me, they were from good, hard-working, proud Jewish families. We were consistently told we were self-hating Jews. The day after my bar mitzvah, like so many of my generation, I began a journey without the nourishment of Jewish life. When asked by the New York Times Magazine in 1992 to photograph the Rebbe Mendel Schneerson, I never could imagine the moments I would experience over the next 32 years that changed the course of my and my family's life. The director of photography, Kathy Ryan, explained the story was about a Hasidic Rebbe, a leader of missionary Jews. She would messenger over the story for me to read before I started making images. By this time, I was known for a body of work titled Uncle Charlie, and he was my wise guy uncle who suffered from mental illness. And that body of work was acknowledged by many foundations, museums. What the Times wanted me to do was make images of this Hasidic Rebbe with the same intimacy as I did my uncle. A Rebbe who was understood to be larger than life. Before going to Crown Heights, I read the draft of the story. It was very, very clear that Rebbe Schneerson was an important Hasidic leader, not just for the Brooklyn neighborhood he lived in, but around the world. I spent over a month making images of the Rebbe in the community, and I was embraced by both. There's nothing orthodox about the Rebbe's approach to Jews in the diaspora. 770 emanated an energy like no other. Intimacy, connection, love, devotion, all folded into an organized chaos, which made for me the opportunity to make moving images. As I stood inches from the Rebbe, photographing as he was engrossed in his prayers, as I didn't exist. When it came time to hold the Torah, he moved with such energy and speed, I was taken back that he was soon to be 90. It is that energy that kept me coming back to 770, which gave me the opportunity to create even more important imagery for the story, The Oracle of Crown Heights. A photograph is a visual memory of a moment, and all the images I made of the Rebbe and his Hasidim, it was the fourth Yahrtzeit of the Rebbitzin's wife, when the Rebbe, who was facing east praying during evening services, would suddenly turn and start moving across the room. The entire room was moving. I made the image of this tremendous passion and deep belief innate to Chabad ideals. No one was a spectator. The energy in 770 was palpable. The sparse furniture in the synagogue was irrelevant. It was pulsating spirituality that emerged during a Hasidic gathering. It was the Rebbe and his Hasidism, a deep connection. They were in love. They were moved by his every word. And one interesting point of that image is that the Rebbe is not centered in the image. The Rebbe is off to the side, and his Hasidim are in the center. While I did not understand then, they were going on to march out from that moment and follow his directives to do better, to reach out to another Jew, be kind to another person, and of course to build Chabad centers of love and inclusivity. As great as the Rebbe was in his own right, it was his Hasidim and their inheritance to his every word who truly made him who he was and carried out his vision. And that's what made the image so compelling. There is something that is true now as it was then. It's that sense it's possible that the Rebbe is more alive today more than ever. I'll never forget the dreadful morning in 2008 when I learned of the massacre in Mumbai's Chabad house. I called the magazine and asked to be assigned to Crown Heights. At the infamous press conference at the Jewish Children's Museum, I felt incredible anger and sadness that our Jewish blood had been spilled. I felt that my contribution to the memory of the Holtzbergers of Mumbai was finally materialize my idea of making images of the Shluchim, the Rebbe's army. With David Zaklovsky's help, I traveled to far-flung places like Siberia, Cuba, Dominican Republic, and China. I learned that in each location, the Jewish community needs are unique. In Siberia, the effects of communism were evident as Jews were slowly continuing to emerge and reclaim their Judaism. In places like Cuba, the Jewish community suffers immensely economically. The Chabad emissaries learned to tap into the needs of their community, using them to spread the Rebbe's message and lessons. They embraced the unique cultural proclivities innate to that location. What ties all these stories together, whether it's Passover Seder in Peru or the boxer Yuri Foreman, is that we are all one people and there is no judgment. The Rebbe said America is a righteous country and we have tremendous freedom to practice openly. After traveling around the world and photographing Chabad and seeing how hard and dangerous it is to be a Jew, I decided over 20 years ago to keep my head covered. But with my brother David explaining to me the difference of just covering my head and wearing a yarmulke, it's about pride. And as you can see, I heard David. David has made it possible with his and family love for me to embrace the mitzvahs of wearing tzutzes, having mezuzahs on all my doors, and recently making the effort to put tefillin on every day. The Rebbe personally told me in 1992 I should never forget about Mashiach. I've been explained that during Messianic times, it's time when people will live peacefully together. It's a time when we will be able to talk without getting angry, together with David Zaklovsky, a prolific journalist, and I can't stress that enough, because we live in a free society, and there's a reason it's called the First Amendment. And David has embraced that as a Hasid, as a proud Hasid, and also as a proud American. And I think we should never, ever underestimate that special thing that David has. It's much easier for me, and I know we're all Jews, and the Rebbe didn't believe in you're a Reformed Jew and a secular Jew, and I think that's a very groovy, beautiful thing. But it is harder for David to do what he does. So when we leave here tonight, that's something I deeply respect. Okay, so together with David, we created The Oracle, Portraits of Rebbe Mendel Schneerson. The book is a microcosm of Messianic times. There are Jews and non-Jews, Democrats, Republicans, great Jewish leaders, everyday people, an artist, and even a homeless guy named Charlie Buttons. They are telling their relationship to the Rebbe, accompanied by images made of the Rebbe that I made in 1992. It's hard for me to believe, but I embrace it 32 years later, that I'm here to say thank you to my Rebbe. And that those people who unfortunately brutalized us as young Jews, it worked out. And I'm in a better place, and the Jewish world is in a better place from this simple thing that the Rebbe loved us all. And I can see here, not everyone's in a black hat, and not everyone was born into Chabad, And that's a beautiful thing, and thank you for being here. I would like to make special thank yous to Rabbi Krinsky, my most heartfelt thank yous, and my deepest respect for all that he had given to make the Oracle of Crown Heights come to fruition. But it's his friendship and his beautiful smile over the last 32 years that I am most thankful for. The last thing I want to say is that the Rebbe came here as a refugee. And he came to a country, even though America is a righteous country on one hand, he came to a nation that didn't want Jews or Jews like him. And I think as New Yorkers, doesn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat, liberal or conservative, I would like you to, for me, and what I got from the Rebbe and being around Chabad all these years, is if you're walking down the streets of New York and you see a migrant, don't turn your back, say hello, because that could have been your Rebbe. And if you don't like that comparison, like, I'm sorry. I get my 15 minutes up here, and because I once read an op-ed when I was working on my Uncle Charlie book, and it was like 1919 op-ed in the Daily News. And it said the greatest scourge facing New York City and America were the Jews, and that they had to be dealt with. And the author of that op-ed was the New York City Police Commissioner. Okay, so again, I think if you got a message from the Rebbe, when you're walking down the street, the concept of tzedakah, or the simple thing is, hi, how are you? To me, that's what I think the Rebbe would be, one of the things I think that's the concept of doing the right thing. So I want to thank everyone here, each and every one of you, for making this world a better place. We all keep the Rebbe alive, if you met him or you didn't meet him, wherever we came from. And we can all make the world a better place and a brighter place. So thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Mark, thank you for those beautiful words from the heart. You even made me cry. Our next speaker is a dear friend of mine, David Zaklovsky. He is an archivist, a researcher, a biographer, and has published over 40 books. I'm getting there. Not there yet. I'm following his lead. On Jewish history and thought. He has written for numerous newspapers. He did the interview for the Oracle, and his essay, Rebbe by Choice, is featured in there. Without further ado, my dear friend, Rab David.
Thank you, Rabbi Raskin. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you to the Gordys, to other people I know. Thank you to my sister for coming. Thank you to Attorney General. It's really special to meet you. We met many times, interviewed you, and his very special wife, Diana, many, many years ago. The story goes that someone's driving down the highway and the car is going quicker. He says that person's a murderer. The person is driving slower. That person is a alta kaker. So the point is that at times when we're driving, wherever we are, we feel that the person next to us, the person on the side of us, is less important, is less becoming, less needy, less what they need. But what's fascinating about the Rebbe was that he was so busy. As a person, as an archivist, most people don't get to see how busy and how involved the Rebbe was in so many different projects. So if it was the 1950s, there was Morocco, Tunisia, Israel, England, Brazil, Argentina, then many places in America. It wasn't just Chabad houses at that point. There were people all around the place that he was advising and trying to get them involved in Jewish activities. Not necessarily that most people actually realize what's going on. But then, in my book, I bring a series of letters, correspondence of someone named Toby Flint, who was a bachelor of 40 years old, who sat in the Rebbe's room, one night at 2 in the morning for 45 minutes, speaking about things I don't know necessarily that I would appreciate to listen to for 45 minutes at 2 a.m. in the morning. So the concept was that to him, when I brought up to Rabbi Krinsky recently, I said, I was telling him the story. He says, to him it didn't surprise, because the greatest person was just as important as the person who was simple. The homeless person, Charlie Buttons, who's featured in the book, every single Friday used to stop the Rebbe in the middle of the street. We could think that Friday afternoon is a very important time, preparing for the Sabbath or Shabbat. But he sat there and had, the 2 or 3 minutes conversation and smiled at him and listened to what he had to say. He says, he told me himself that he just was, blabbling, from what he did that week. And the Rebbe cared for that person. What's fascinating is that Robert Kennedy was in Crown Heights on a campaign trail. JFK, John F. Kennedy was in Crown Heights on a campaign trail, and they called up the Rebbe's office and they asked, could he come in just to drop by and just to say hello, speak, and maybe the Rebbe could tell him something that would influence him. That happened to Robert F. Kennedy a little bit later, and when they knocked on the Rebbe's door, the Rebbe said that there's a what do you call it? There's someone in the room. Who was the person in the room? Was a widow who was crying and telling the Rebbe about his issues. To him, that was just as important as JFK. Surely he wanted to be in there he wanted to meet JFK and influence him the same way he wanted to influence a lot of people. But there's no difference. I need to right now deal with this widow. What's fascinating is that not everyone agreed with what the Rebbe had to say. Didn't. There was people who in letters wrote him things that were considered that I would be a blush reading them. There were people who disagreed with him on paper and in public, but he greeted every single person who came to him with a smile, listened to what they had to say, and tried to encourage them. And where did that come from? That came from pride. Pride is not just feeling of good about yourself, but actually internally being comfortable with who you are. The Rebbe had a deep, deep pride for being Jewish, being a rabbi, knowing what he wanted. It didn't make a difference that someone would say something negative about him, someone would say something bad about him. And that was the beauty of who the Rebbe was. And that is, over many years, Chabad has learned to embrace every single person, every single person for who they are. But in who we are, in changing our internally, when we feel comfortable with who we are, when we feel pride with who we are, at the end of the day, when something comes to us that feels negative, it doesn't exist in ourselves. That was the beauty of who the Rebbe was, and I really appreciate Rabbi Raskin. I want to say it again of this event. It wasn't easy for him to stand up and continue the event to happening, and I really appreciate that on all levels, my whole heart.
Thank you, Rabbi David, for the beautiful words. It's truly an honor and a privilege to introduce the next speaker. Robert Abrams was a member of the New York State Assembly from 1966. Now, I was not born yet in 1966. So I cannot say I remember him then, but he was there till 1969, then the Bronx Borough President from 1970 to 1978, and then the Attorney General, I do remember him as Attorney General of New York from 1979 to 1993. He continued his career as an attorney for many years at Strzok & Strzok, Levan Law Firm, and most importantly, a proud Jew, a friend of the Jewish community, and an honor to have him here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Raskin. Thanks for your hospitality. This is a great honor for me to be here tonight to launch this extraordinary document. This book that David Zaklovsky and Mark Asnin created is a work of art. It is unique. It is spectacular. And to be part of it is something extraordinary for me. It's an opportunity to read the reflections of 50 people and see the artistry and photography of a very special person all come together to give us an image of somebody who is very important. Let me say for myself at the outset that I feel that the Lubavitcher Rebbe of blessed memory was the most important figure for the Jewish world in the 20th century. Now, having said that, understand that there were a lot of important special people who lived during the 20th century. Theodor Herzl, Albert Einstein, Sigmund Freud, David Ben-Gurion, Chaim Weizmann, Golda Meir, Danny Kaye, Red Buttons, a lot of very special, Barbara Streisand, Brooklyn, a lot of special people. But I think he is the most important for a number of reasons, and let me try to cite them to you. He had a vision. He had a vision about trying to extend Yiddishkeit throughout the world in areas that were totally barren of anything relating to the Jewish world and the Jewish community. And he had an ability to translate that vision into practical implementation and reality. And his idea was to inspire emissaries, shluchim, to go to the far-flung corners of the United States and the world and to establish bastions of Jewish life and Jewish identity. I saw this myself. I understand it because I myself have been to areas like Austin, Texas, Anchorage, Alaska, Bal Harbour, Florida, East Hampton, Southampton, Moscow, Paris, Venice, Rome, Madrid, in the Ukraine, to Kherson, to Nikolaev, to Odessa, neighboring Moldova, to Kishinev, to Shanghai, to Beijing, to Uzbekistan, Tashkent, Bukhara, Samarkand, places that had no Jewish life, or at one time had Jewish life, and was a dying ember. And what these shluchim have done is take the vision of the Rebbe and go and do. And it's nothing short of miraculous. They come in many instances without even knowing the language, without having a kopek, without having relationships in that existing community. You come back within a year, there's a shul, it might be in an apartment, it might be in a little humble building. You come back in 2 years, it's in a different, grander place. It's got a school. It's got a plan for a mikveh. These extraordinary people somehow building communities, developing relationships, gathering resources to build Jewish life. Jewish life that is shared not only by the local community, but the world Jewish community. A businessman is traveling in the world. He wants to continue to say Kaddish for a loved one. He needs a minyan. Because of the Rebbe, wherever that is in the world, it can happen. Just 2 years ago, Chabad accomplished establishing locations in the 50th state of the United States, in South Dakota. And now, when you come to the annual kinnis, the annual gathering of some 5,000 to 6,000 shluchim, first of all, where can you fit 6,000 people and feed 6,000 people? That is a gargantuan task in and of itself. Here in Brooklyn, they somehow found along the waterfront where the QE2 docks a vast open area, and they set it up for the dinner. 120 chefs, 360 waiters to accommodate these thousands of people who come together. Shluchim, to be reunited, to be reinvested, to be reinvigorated about what each is doing and what collectively they are doing for the Jewish people. Extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. Chabad, Lubavitch, started as a small sect. It is now the largest Jewish organization in the world. 1,000 synagogues in the United States, serving 818 campuses in 22 different countries. The Pew Center has done research and established that 38% of American Jews have in one way or another been touched by Chabad. This extraordinary man energizing shluchim to accomplish this. And as has been said, he paid attention to everybody. It didn't matter whether you were a John F. Kennedy or somebody who was in distress, a widow or a young man. I was at one of these dinners a few years ago, and the chief rabbi of the United Kingdom, Jonathan Sachs, was the speaker, and he told the story. He was a young man, he was searching. What was he going to do with his life? He had written letters to the Rebbe, having gotten responses to those letters, but he wanted more. He needed deep personal advice. He wanted personal contact. He tried to get a meeting with the Rebbe, and he got a meeting. And he sat with the Rebbe and said, look, I think I want to be a lawyer or an engineer. I want to ferret out what's the right thing to do. Can you help me? Can you direct me? Which is the specialty I should take in either one? And the Rebbe said, no. You are going to be a rabbi. That's how Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs became a rabbi. The Rebbe told him he should become a rabbi. The Rebbe gave this advice to people all over the world. They sought his advice, like Jonathan Sachs. We know this personally. My wife and I was the borough president of the Bronx. I was 36 years old. I was devoted to my job. I was a bachelor. I didn't have time to really pursue, a marriage. One day, a rabbi, I was very active in the Soviet Jewry movement. A rabbi came over to me, Rabbi Gilbert Clapperman of Beth Shalom Synagogue in Lawrence. He said, I have the perfect girl for you. She's just right for you. She comes from a wonderful family. She's got your values. She's against the war in Vietnam. She's this, she's that. She's attractive. You've got to call her. And here's her name and number. And he gave me this little piece of paper. I was busy. Went to a rally 2-3 weeks later. He said, so did you call her? I said, Rabbi, I'll get to it. You should call her. Went to a rally a few weeks later. I saw him from the corner of my eye. I figured, I know what he's going to ask me, so I started to move away. He's, Bob, what about that slip of paper I gave you? I said, Rabbi, I'll get to it. You're going to lose her. You better be careful. Call her up. didn't do it. I had a secretary. Her name was Peggy Rodriguez. She was a civil servant. The civil service in this country produces either the best or the worst. It could be a terrible hanger-on for 40 or 50 years, or you could be an extraordinary person who transfers loyalty to whoever is the boss at the moment in time. And I was lucky as the borough president of the Bronx to have the latter. Peggy Rodriguez was the ultimate. She was the best. She was an Irish woman who married a Spaniard, Charlie Rodriguez, and I considered her my Jewish mother. She ran my life. My mother loved her because every morning when I came into the office, she said, "Good morning, Mr. President." I mean, for her son to be referred to in that way, this had to be a special woman. So one day I'm in the office, and Peggy opens the door, and her glasses, she had this string around her neck, her glasses, she said, "Mr. President, I have that rabbi on the phone. You know what he's calling about. Take the call her up, take an hour of your time, do what he says." All right, Peggy, put him through. Rabbi Klapperman, "So, new, what's happening? Rabbi, I will call her." And I called her, and my wife Diane is here. We had a blind date. And the rest is history. So when we got engaged, there was a notice in the newspaper, Borough President of Bronx getting engaged to get married. He's going to get married in the Botanical Gardens in the Bronx. A rabbi from Queens, Israel Mauschwitz, the rabbi from the Hillcrest Jewish Center, called me up and said, so Bob, I hear you're engaged, you're going to get married. You should have a bracha from the Rebbe. You know the Lubavitcher Rebbe, right? I said, I know who he is. He's a great man. He's a very important person. I don't know him. You don't know him? Let me get you an appointment to see him. You need a blessing for your wedding. I said, okay. So we got an appointment, midnight, 770 Eastern Parkway. Diane and I, we go. We're a little early, 11:45. We're there. It's 12:30. It's 1. It's 1:20. It's 1:40. It's 2 o'clock. Are we going to get in to see the Rebbe? He has an appointment. He's in with Jan Pierce. Jan Pierce, the internationally renowned star of the Metropolitan Opera. At 3 o'clock in the morning, the door opens. Jan Pierce walked out. We went in. And I didn't know what to expect. The Rebbe, by reputation, such an extraordinary human being. And I was startled. Here was this gracious, gentle, kind man, sat us down, unaffected by power, by glory, one-to-one personal relationship, penetrating blue eyes, and he gave us a blessing. And that began a relationship for the two of us, to go to communal Farbrengen over many years, to have other opportunities to meet with him at a personal and individual level, and it was an extraordinary thing. And maybe I would share with you at this moment, two special things that happened to us in the course of that relationship. Each year, we would go to Crown Heights on the holiday of Hoshana Rabbah. That's when the Rebbe would stand in his little wooden hut and give out honey cake. And the lines would be blocks long of people coming to try to see the Rebbe, to get the piece of honey cake and a blessing. So each year we did that. And this one particular year, when we finally get to the Rebbe, greets us, we greet him, hands us the honey cake, and he says, "I give you a blessing for an addition to your family within the next year." We were flabbergasted. We'd been married for about 8-9 years. We had a daughter, Rachel. We thought she was extraordinary. We never got around to thinking about having another child. How can somebody be any better or as good as Rachel? But there came a moment when we felt that maybe this is the moment. This is the opportunity. My father had passed away. It might be an opportunity to have a name. It would be a great opportunity for us. But the fact of the matter is, this was a personal issue. We didn't tell anyone about this. How could the Rebbe have said this? How did he know this? In fact, a couple of weeks before, we went to the preeminent expert in the field, because my wife at that time was 48 years old. Maybe that's the important message that I almost neglected to tell you. She was 40, pardon me? 47. I stand corrected. 47 years old. But you delivered at 48. And this doctor said, you have less than 5% chance for having a successful birth. Within a month, Diane was pregnant. Within a year, we come the next Hoshana Rabbah. Diane cradling Becky in her arms to see the Rebbe, to get the honey cake. And he says, using the exact words of the year before, I see you brought the addition to your family. And I said, thanks to you, Rebbe. He goes, an extraordinary story matched by another personal story. Diane and I are members of a congregation, Kehilloth Jeshurun, in the Upper East Side. The rabbi makes an announcement. There's a young man, Jay Feinberg. He's in his early 20s. He's stricken with cancer. He needs a bone marrow transplant. And time is running out. He's searching for the proper match. And he's going from shul to shul. And this week it's our shul. On Sunday, please come, be tested for your bone marrow, and maybe it'll be helpful to Jay Feinberg. We come, we see Jay Feinberg, we're tested, and suddenly it dawns on me, wait a minute, this afternoon, we're going to go to Crown Heights. We're going to go to 770 to see the Rebbe. It's like he gives out on a periodic basis crispy dollar bills to all those who are in line. And sometimes, if you're lucky enough, he says, I give you a double portion. Gives you $2 bills. So we were going to do that this afternoon. So I said to Jay, I said, you know, it so happens my wife and I were going to go to see the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Would you like to come along? He says, that would be wonderful. It would be fantastic. Because I figured maybe this might be helpful to Jay and get a blessing. Jay comes, we meet with the Rebbe, and by the way, Lubavitch was ahead of its time in technology. This is captured on film. You can see it on television. It's there in video. We're talking with the Rebbe, and Jay is at my side, and I introduce Jay to the Rebbe, and I tell Rebbe the circumstances of why he's there. The Rebbe says, I give you a blessing, and everything will be okay. Within weeks, Jay Feinberg finds a match, a donor. Fast forward 30 years, Jay Feinberg had created the Gift of Life Bone Marrow Foundation. He has helped save the lives of hundreds of people throughout the world. When the Charles Bronfman Prize was established a few years ago, $100,000 to the person who in the Jewish world made the greatest contribution to the Jewish world, it was Jay Feinberg who got that first prize. So the Rebbe did extraordinary things in his lifetime. And all of us should be indebted to him and be inspired by him. He was a man who felt that every Jew was important, whatever your status, whatever your level of observance. One of the reasons that Chabad has grown so enormously is that it is non-judgmental. The Rebbe accepted every Jew as a worthy human being. And people have flocked, therefore, to Chabad and Lubavitch. And so, let me conclude. I see my time is running short. To say that the Rebbe is fundamentally important for a whole variety of reasons. Demographers have been analyzing what will happen to the Jewish community going forward in the next 50 years, in the next 100 years. There are prognostications and analysis of data that is troubling about what the fate of our community is. The rate and level of assimilation is so high that there are serious issues about continuity for our people. The way in which the Jewish community is going to survive and thrive is by having outreach, by having attachment to Jewish ritual, to Jewish history, to Jewish meaning, all of the things that the Rebbe has sought to do and is accomplishing throughout the world through the efforts of his shulchim. So buy this book, read this book. Not everybody is lucky enough to have had the opportunity to meet the Rebbe in person. But if you read this book, you will know the Rebbe. He will become your friend, he will become your soulmate, and he will become a person who is absolutely important to you. Buy the book, you will never regret it. Thank you very much.
Before tonight, I knew Robert Abrams as the borough president, attorney general, a great lawyer, but now I know him as my dear fellow chassid. We have a very special surprise for everybody, a speaker that was not on the itinerary, but has agreed to say a few words, and that is, we know beside every great man is a greater woman. So I spoke to Robert Abrams' wife a few minutes ago, and she agreed to come up and say a few words. So without further ado, please welcome Diane.
It's a great pleasure for me to be here tonight. I'll try to make my words few since I don't want to take too much time, but I'm happy to have the privilege. And the Rebbe, as you can tell, has a very special place in our hearts, and we will never forget the first time we met him. By the way, I had no idea that this secretary was haunting my husband to call me, because, you know, somebody in my neighborhood said, oh, the borough president's going to come to speak, you've got to go to meet him. But I was too busy, because as he said, we were trying to end the war in Vietnam at that point, very important. And I got involved in the feminist movement in the 60s, women's rights, what about the rights for women? And I was a lawyer. I graduated from Columbia Law School in 1964, so I had a lot of work to do. So he was not on my mind. I just want to let you know that until he called me. Anyway, so, but I'm very happy that he did, of course. And I'll tell you how it came to be, a very short story. I was having Shabbos lunch at my parents' home. At that point, I was in my 30s, and I was not yet married. My youngest sister was married. My younger brother was married. And every time I'd see my father, it was a very, very sweet man, he'd say to me, time is marching on. Time is marching on. Okay. So we were sitting at the table, and I could see they wanted to know, you know, well, what? I said, you know what? I could never marry anyone unless he was against the war in Vietnam. And my father said, that is the most idiotic thing I have ever heard anybody say. Why can't you disagree and be married? Anyway, we went on, we finished. Unbeknownst to me, my father went across the street and spoke to his good friend, Rabbi Gilbert Clapperman, who was the rabbi of our shul, and my father was vice president of the shul and so forth. And he said, did you ever hear of anything such a mishigas? She won't marry someone unless he's against a war. So all of a sudden, Rabbi Clapperman got this big smile on his face, and he said, I know a nice Jewish boy who's against the war, and I am going to speak to him. So anyway, luckily he didn't tell me that he spoke to him or anything until I got the call, and then he called me and said, oh yes, Rabbi Clapperman, all right, okay, we'll meet. And we'll tell you another funny part. I won't go into the details, but I brought 2 or 3 friends along with me on that date, because why would I spend a whole evening with someone I didn't even know? Anyway. So I just want to tell you how I came to write the book that is supposed to be the printing, according to my publisher at OU Press. The books were supposed to be completed, the printing, on June 30th of this year. After that first night when we met the Rebbe, I thought he was so kind and so nice, someone I'd never seen before. He didn't know us from anybody. We weren't Chabad, we weren't Hasidim, although we came, from nice Jewish families. And I just want to thank the photographer who took the pictures in this book. You can see it here. The kindness that shined out of the Rebbe's eyes into each person. I cannot explain it. I felt like he was maybe an uncle of mine or a cousin or a grandfather. Or he loved us so much. We were total strangers to him. And as somebody said, it's almost like he looked into your soul and he knew what to tell you that would make you the best person you could possibly be. He knew what it was you had to do to complete your mission, or what was, as you saw from the Rabbi Sachs example, what was the important contribution you could make to the world. And I just feel so fortunate that we were able to meet a person like that. And I'll just tell you 2 things about my book, and then I'm going to finish. The name of my book is My Grandmother's Candlesticks, Judaism and Feminism, a multi-generational memoir. And the way it came to be was this. After I met the Rebbe, I thought he was so kind and so wonderful. And all these pictures you'll see the kindness pouring out of him. I said, he was such a nice man. I'm going to send him this article that was just published by the OU about my grandmother. Because after I became active in the women's movement in the 60s, and like in my law school class, for example, there were about 11 women and 350 men. So I began to get an idea of what it was like out there in the world for women. And I became active. And then all of a sudden, feminists started writing articles about how Judaism denigrates women and puts them in an inferior place. Now, I knew my family, and in particular, I knew my grandmother, who was such a strong, beautiful woman, totally traditional life, totally committed to every aspect of halacha, but also kind and good and helpful, and she would visit people in the hospital, and she loved everyone in the family. And she did wonderful things for me too, which you can read about in the book. I'm not going to go into it. So I wrote this article about her, and also about her, about my feeling about how the women's movement was very wrong about the place that women had in Judaism. And then after the Rebbe got it, we began our relationship. We'd see him, and he would see me. He'd say, you should write a book about your grandmother. You should write more about her. And I thought he was just being nice to me, whatever, so I didn't pay that much attention, which, big mistake. Anyway, maybe not. And then, finally, one day when we came to see him after the Crown Heights riots, to see how could we help the relationship between the Jewish community and the black community, and he came in, he didn't even talk to my husband. He looked at me and he said, "Whatever happened to that book?" I said, "Oh my God," I thought he'd forgotten about it. He said, "You are taking too long." I wanted to fall into a hole in the floor. So I said, "You're right, you're right, you're right, you're right." And then he said, when you finish that book, everything in life will be mazel dik for you. I said, oh my God, I've got to write this book. So I left. This was now in the 1990s. We'd first met him in the 70s. And I spent a whole year trying to write the book. But somehow I realized I knew it wasn't a book because I'd written other things. Then when my husband was writing his memoir during COVID, one of my daughters called me and she said, you know what, Mom? This was Rachel. She was living in Yerushalayim at that time with her family. Now that Dad's writing his book, remember, you made a promise to the Rebbe that you were going to write a book. I think you better do it now, because it's now or never. And I said, you know what? She's right. And I sat down and I started writing the book. My husband helped me. He was very, very good advice, help. 6 years I spent writing the book, day and night. I had to leave my other job, selling real estate, because it took over my life. But I finally finished it, and the OU Press said the books are going to be ready by June 30th. And it is now exactly 50 years since the Rebbe first told me to write that book. But you know what I realized? I really wasn't able to write it until just now because I knew I didn't have enough material about my grandmother because she was someone who didn't speak about herself. Like the Rebbe, she was someone who thought about others. But once I had my children and now my grandchildren, and I realized the important role that women play in Judaism, passing the traditions down to future generations. And that was something that was also very important to the Rebbe because my research also showed me what he has said about that and how important, going back to the days of Egypt when it was due to the women, the continuity of the Jews in those days. There's a lot to know about that because when Jewish newborn boys were being thrown into rivers, the men said, we're not having any more children because we won't have our children thrown into the river. And the women said, no, we have to continue. We have to continue to have children. And they did. And they were liberated. And I won't go into all the details, but women do play a very important role without getting into conflict of any halachic rules or anything like that, not necessary one bit. So I am very grateful to the Rebbe for so many things, not only for my husband, number one, telling me to write the book, but my beautiful children, the children we've been able to raise, who now both with their husbands live in Yerushalayim and are playing an important role in the Jewish community there, and our grandchildren who, Baruch Hashem, are being raised as proud Jews. As a matter of fact, we just visited their school. One of Rachel's son, Binyamin Yaakov, named both for Bob's father Binyamin and my father Yaakov, and Rachel's daughter Sarah, are in a school in the Rova, in the old city. And our little Sarah says to me, you know what, Bubby, she calls me Bubby, and Grandpa Bob, when we go out of our school, we can see the Kotel. And these are the kinds of children that, thank God, we have been able to raise. And it's through the rituals, the candle lighting, the challah baking, all of these ways that women can contribute in so many ways. And so I want to thank my husband, numero uno. I want to thank this amazing photographer and these people who put this book out, who've shown, because what we do now, look, there was anti-Semitism then. Unfortunately, we're seeing a resurgence. But the Rebbe spoke to that too. He said the way to deal with that, pride in who you are and what your rituals are, knowledge of your history. We are not newcomers to that part of the world. It goes back thousands of years. So the teachings of Chabad, unfortunately, the Rebbe's not here to advise us personally anymore, but if we study him and what he's taught us, it will help us get through these difficult times. So thank you.
Thank you for those beautiful words. To thank everyone for coming tonight. We want to thank our sponsors, Nicole, Jewel May, and the other sponsors who would like to remain anonymous. At this time, we're going to be davening Mincha Ma'ariv in the library. Those who want to purchase a book, you can do so at this time. You get the signatures of the photographer and the author. We also have another book in the back that was inspired by the Rebbe called Genesis, and Menachem is here to sell those books as well. Thank you all for coming. God bless you. Do a mitzvah. Change the world today. Thank you.
Come on. Yeah, like that way.
Let's get his wife.
Oh, maybe we should go down too.
We should go down.
Come up.
No, we'll go down.
All right.